For 6 years, Sophia had been more than just a nurse to Alexander Stone. She had been his hope when doctors delivered devastating news, his strength during the darkest nights, and his unwavering companion through a journey no one believed would end in recovery. What she didn't know was that for the past 3 months, Alexander had been hiding the most miraculous secret. And today, he was finally ready to reveal it in a way that would change both their lives forever. The news had dominated headlines for weeks. Tech billionaire Alexander Stone critical after racing accident. The 30-year-old CEO of Innovate Tech, worth $3.2 billion according to Forbes, had been competing in a charity race when his car went airborne at 180 miles per hour, flipping multiple times before coming to rest against a concrete barrier. The spinal cord injury was severe. T12 complete injury, the doctors explained to his devastated family. The likelihood of ever walking again was virtually zero. For a man who had built his empire on the belief that any problem could be solved with enough determination and resources, this diagnosis was more than medical. It was existential. Alexander's penthouse apartment was transformed into a medical facility within days. Hospital beds, specialized equipment, and a team of rotating nurses became his new reality. But one by one, the medical staff found reasons to request transfers. Not because Alexander was difficult, quite the opposite. He had retreated so completely into himself that caring for him felt like tending to a ghost. That's when Sophia Carter arrived. At 28, Sophia had specialized in spinal cord rehabilitation for 5 years. She'd seen the devastating impact of sudden paralysis on patients and families. But she'd also witnessed remarkable recoveries that defied medical predictions. What set her apart wasn't just her clinical expertise, it was her refusal to see her patients as their diagnoses. When she walked into Alexander's bedroom for the first time, she found him staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline, his expression as flat and lifeless as his legs. "Good morning, Mr. Stone," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I'm Sophia Carter, and I'll be working with you on your recovery." Alexander didn't turn from the window. "There is no recovery. The last 3 nurses figured that out pretty quickly." "The last 3 nurses weren't me," Sophia replied simply, beginning her assessment of his equipment and medications. "And I don't work on assumptions, I work on possibilities." The first month was the hardest. Alexander barely spoke, refused physical therapy, and seemed determined to prove that hope was pointless. But Sophia had dealt with resistance before, and she understood that anger was often grief in disguise. Instead of pushing, she established routines that gave Alexander control over small things, when to take medications, what to watch on television, how to arrange his schedule. She brought books on technology and innovation, knowing his mind needed stimulation even if his body was struggling. "You know," she said one afternoon while helping him with range of motion exercises, "I read that your company developed that new neural interface technology, the one that helps people with disabilities control computers with their thoughts." It was the first time Alexander had looked directly at her in weeks. "You've been researching me." "I research all my patients. I like to understand what makes them feel alive." Sophia continued the exercises, noting the slight muscle tension in his legs, something she filed away for future consideration. That technology could change millions of lives. "Could have," Alexander corrected bitterly. "Hard to innovate when you can't even feel your own body." Stephen Hawking developed his most groundbreaking theories after his diagnosis, Sophia said quietly. Sometimes our limitations force us to think beyond what we thought was possible. That conversation was the turning point, not toward recovery, not yet, but toward engagement. Alexander began asking Sophia about her background, her education, her reasons for choosing spinal rehabilitation. He learned that she'd grown up in Detroit, put herself through nursing school while caring for her diabetic grandmother, and had specifically chosen this specialty after watching her grandfather navigate life with a spinal injury from a construction accident. He used to tell me that courage wasn't about not being afraid, she shared during one of their longer conversations. It was about deciding what mattered more than the fear. As months turned into a year, then two, their relationship evolved into something neither had expected. Sophia worked 12-hour shifts, but often stayed longer, ensuring Alexander's evening routine was settled before heading to her small apartment across town. She pushed him to maintain his involvement with his company through video conferences, encouraged him to continue his charitable foundation's work, and gradually introduced physical therapy exercises disguised as routine care. When Alexander resisted, she didn't argue. She simply waited and tried a different approach. "You're stubborn," he told her one day, frustration clear in his voice as she guided his legs through another set of exercises. "I prefer persistent," she replied with a smile. "Besides, you're not exactly compliant yourself. Yesterday you told me physical therapy was medically sanctioned torture." Despite his protests, Alexander began looking forward to their sessions. Sophia had a way of making the impossible feel manageable and the unbearable feel temporary. She celebrated small victories, improved circulation, better muscle tone, days without the crushing depression that had marked his first year after the accident. By the third year, their conversations had expanded beyond medical care and business. They talked about books, music, dreams they'd had before life took unexpected turns. Alexander learned about Sophia's love of classical music and her secret ambition to travel to Vienna to hear the Philharmonic. Sophia discovered Alexander's passion for astronomy and his childhood dream of space exploration. "If I could walk," Alexander said one evening as they watched the sunset from his terrace, "I'd take you to Vienna. We'd get the best seats at the Musikverein and listen to Mozart the way he was meant to be heard." Sophia felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional care and everything to do with the man Alexander had become through his trials. "Maybe someday," she said softly, not trusting herself to say more. What Sophia didn't know was that sometime during the fourth year, Alexander had begun experiencing sensations in his legs. Tiny at first, a tingle, a moment of warmth, the faintest pressure when she performed his exercises. He'd mentioned it to his doctor during a routine visit, but had sworn him to secrecy pending further tests. The test revealed what seemed impossible: nerve regeneration, improved spinal cord function, the gradual return of motor control. It was rare, unprecedented given the severity of his original injury, but undeniable. Alexander was recovering, but instead of celebrating, Alexander found himself terrified. Not of walking again, but of losing Sophia. If he recovered, would she move on to another patient? Would the woman who had become the center of his world disappear now that he no longer needed medical care? So he made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He kept his recovery secret. During the day, with Sophia, he remained in his wheelchair, careful not to reveal the growing strength in his legs. At night, alone, he practiced walking, building his strength while planning something that would either win Sophia's heart or lose her forever. For months, this double life continued. Alexander maintained the pretense of paralysis while secretly working with a different physical therapist in a private gym he'd had constructed in his building's basement. His recovery progressed remarkably. Within 6 months of his first sensation, he could walk unassisted for short distances. The deception ate at him, but so did the fear of losing the one person who had seen him at his worst and stayed anyway. Sophia had become more than his nurse. She was his anchor, his inspiration, and the woman he loved more than he'd thought possible. The plan Alexander devised was risky, emotional, and completely dependent on Sophia's reaction. He had his assistant arrange for a string quartet to set up in the apartment's main living area. He'd purchased a ring, not the ostentatious diamond his wealth could afford, but a simple, elegant band with a small stone that reminded him of Sophia's eyes. On a Tuesday morning, in their 6th year together, Sophia arrived to find the apartment filled with the sound of classical music, specifically Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11, which they'd listened to together dozens of times. "Alexander," she called, finding his bedroom empty and his wheelchair abandoned. She followed the music to the living room and stopped dead. Alexander stood in the center of the room, supported by his own legs, wearing a suit she hadn't seen in years. The string quartet played softly in the corner, and scattered around the room were photos, pictures of them together over the past 6 years, moments she hadn't realized had been captured. "Sophia," Alexander said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I need to tell you something." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The man she'd cared for, worried about, and gradually fallen in love with was standing and looking at her with an expression that made her heart race and break simultaneously. "I've been walking for 3 months, he continued, taking a careful step toward her. "The doctors say it's a miracle, 1 in a million chance. But that's not the miracle, Sophia." Tears were streaming down her face now, a mixture of joy, confusion, and something that felt like betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me? I'm your nurse, Alexander. I should have known. I could have helped. Because I was afraid," Alexander interrupted, taking another step. "Afraid that if you knew I could walk, you'd think I didn't need you anymore. Afraid that the woman who became my whole world would disappear back into hers." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the tears in his own eyes. "Sophia Carter, you saved my life, not just medically, though you did that too. You saved my soul when I thought it was lost forever. You showed me that strength isn't about what your body can do. It's about what your heart chooses to endure." Alexander slowly lowered himself to one knee, pulling the ring from his jacket pocket. "I know this is unconventional. I know you came here to be my nurse, not to fall in love with your patient. But somewhere in these 6 years, you became everything to me, my hope, my strength, my future." Sophia's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "Sophia Carter, will you marry me? Not because I need a nurse, but because I need you. Not because I'm grateful, though I am, but because I love you more than I thought possible." The silence stretched between them, filled only by Mozart and the sound of Sophia's racing heart. 6 years of professional boundaries, of carefully maintained distance, of suppressed feelings, all crumbled in this moment. "Alexander," she whispered, "I could lose my license. There are rules about relationships with patients." "You're fired," Alexander said immediately, a smile breaking through his tears. "As of this moment, you're no longer my nurse. You're just Sophia, and I'm just Alexander, and we're just 2 people who found love in the most unexpected place." Sophia laughed through her tears, the sound filling the room with more joy than it had held in years. "This is crazy," she said, looking down at him. 6 years of taking care of you, and now you're asking me to let you take care of me." "For the next 60 years, if you'll have me," Alexander replied. "I want to take you to Vienna. I want to dance with you at our wedding. I want to show you the world that you showed me I could still be part of. Yes, Sophia whispered, so quietly that Alexander almost missed it. Yes, yes, Alexander Stone. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I love you. Yes to all of it. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet, Sophia realized that she had indeed been caring for a paralyzed man for 6 years. But his paralysis had never been physical. It had been emotional, spiritual, the inability to imagine a future worth living. And in healing him, he had healed something in her too. The loneliness she'd carried since childhood, the fear that she would always be needed but never wanted, the belief that love was something that happened to other people. 6 months later, Sophia and Alexander were married in the Vienna Musikverein, surrounded by family and friends who had watched their love story unfold. The ceremony was small, elegant, and filled with the same classical music that had provided the soundtrack to their relationship. Sophia's wedding dress was simple but stunning, and when she walked down the aisle, Alexander wept openly. Not just for the woman approaching him, but for the journey that had brought them to this moment. In his wedding speech, Alexander told their guests, "People ask me about my recovery, about the miracle of learning to walk again. But the real miracle was learning to love again. Sophia didn't just help me regain the use of my legs, she helped me regain the use of my heart." Sophia's response was shorter but no less profound. "I thought I was teaching Alexander about healing. Instead, he taught me about hope. I thought I was helping him learn to walk. Instead, he taught me how to fly." A year after their wedding, the Alexander and Sophia Stone Foundation for Spinal Cord Recovery opened its doors. The foundation funded research, provided support for families dealing with spinal injuries, and created a program that paired patients with dedicated nurses for long-term care relationships. The program was revolutionary in its approach. It recognized that healing wasn't just medical, but emotional, and that the relationships between caregivers and patients could be transformative for both parties. "We learned that recovery isn't always about getting back what you lost," Sophia explained to a medical conference. "Sometimes it's about discovering what you never knew you could have." Alexander, walking confidently now, but never forgetting his years in the wheelchair, added, "The accident took away my ability to walk, but it gave me something more valuable. It gave me Sophia, and it taught me that the most important journeys happen in the heart, not on foot." 5 years after their wedding, Sophia and Alexander had 2 children, twins named Hope and Victor, names that reflected their parents' journey. The children grew up knowing that their father had once used a wheelchair, that their mother had been his nurse, and that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. The foundation had become one of the leading spinal cord research facilities in the world. Hundreds of patients had benefited from the long-term care model that Alexander and Sophia had pioneered, and several had experienced their own miraculous recoveries. But perhaps the most important legacy was the message their story sent to patients and caregivers everywhere: that healing is a partnership, that love can grow in any soil, and that sometimes the most profound miracles happen not when we regain what we have lost, but when we discover what we never knew we were looking for. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Alexander and Sophia returned to his penthouse apartment, now converted back to its original design, with no medical equipment in sight. They stood on the same terrace where they'd shared so many conversations, watching the same skyline that had been Alexander's window to the world during his darkest days. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked, leaning against the railing. "The accident, I mean. I know it was terrible, but—" Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How can I regret something that brought me you?" The accident took 6 years of walking, but it gave me a lifetime of love. That seems like a pretty good trade. Sophia smiled, placing her hands over his. Besides, she said, those 6 years taught us both that the most important journeys we take together don't require feet at all. As the sun set over the city they both loved, Alexander and Sophia stood together, no longer patient and nurse but husband and wife, partners in love and life, living proof that sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths, and our most devastating losses lead to our most precious finds. Their love story had begun with an ending, the end of Alexander's life as he knew it. But it had become a beginning that neither of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of care, compassion, and the miraculous ability of the human heart to heal not just bodies, but souls. Sometimes the people who care for us become the people we can't imagine living without. And sometimes the greatest recoveries happen not in our bodies, but in our hearts.